Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Benchmade North Fork. First off, though, I want to thank my buddy Christian for giving me a great deal on one of these. Thank you very much for that, Christian. Next thing, size comparison, of course. This guy is actually not a huge knife. First off, we'll compare it to the Spyderco Delica, although this is the Packer wood version. Actually, the same material. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Right here up against your Ontario Rat number 1 in D2 steel, your steel wheel cut jack, 3.5 inch. And, what the heck, the Benchmade Triage, another Benchmade knife. And so there's your size comparison. One other thing to note, this is the diamond wood version of the knife. There is also a version with G10 scales, kind of black and white G10 with some topography on it. Interesting little thing. So let's go on ahead and go into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this particular pocket knife here. Okay, so on the good side, first off, this is got a very nice blade to it. The blade steel is S30V, which is absolutely one of those steels that is good to go. It's a great steel, 100%. It has plenty of wear resistance for most people. No complaints with S30V. The blade stock is not all that thick either. We're looking a little bit thick in the Spyderco Delica here, but, you know, in the same vicinity as your cut jack here. I'm sorry, this isn't the cut jack, this is the Rat 1. Oy, 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 guys. But anyways, the stock thickness is not too crazy. As a result, this guy actually does cut things reasonably well. This is good for everyday sorts of cutting tasks, which is nice. The blade shape itself is pretty attractive. You've got some nice design elements. You do have a little bit of a recurve in there, a nice little bit of drop pointed to it. You have 2 sets of jimping here because, you know, hey, why not? And you do actually have a sharpening choil down here, which makes it easier to sharpen the entire length of the blade. So on the whole, the blade on this is very nice. Next thing, this has it's a pretty simple thing, all told. What you've got here is a pair of liners, some wood on either side, Benchmade's axis lock, which functions by having this little metal bar slide up on top of the tang of the blade there, locking everything in place until you pull it back. Nice little affair. It's running on phosphor bronze washes. This is going to be a relatively solid, relatively reliable knife. There's not all that much that can go wrong with it. If it gets dirty, you can just hose the thing out. Look, it's good to go in that way. One other advantage it is being an axis lock knife is that you have full ambidextrousness to it. This knife is just as good for a lefty as for a righty, because you can flip this clip around to the other side. At that point, it is fully a lefty knife. Ambidextrous studs, that's a beautiful thing. Southpaws don't get a lot of love in the knife world, and so it's good to see this. Next thing, this has got some nice sources of texturing. You've got some jimping on the blade here. You've got some jimping on the internal liners up here, as well as you've got this area down here, which adds a little bit of extra texturing, and then these little bits of contouring here. For instance, this grabs into your grabs your finger very nicely, and so this really isn't going anywhere, even though the wood itself is left relatively smooth and contoured. So that's very, very nice. I appreciate that. The ergos on the knife are actually pretty good in my relatively small hands. I'm able to grab it nicely. It fills the hand. The clip is in a nice position such that it adds a little bit more to grip onto, but it doesn't really provide much in the way of hot spots. Overall, it feels pretty nice, and it feels pretty nice on the open, too. The thumb studs are very well positioned for me, which is nice because this has a very, very nice action, too. This is, as you can see, just from as I'm doing this review, it is a joy to flip around because this one is done very nicely and, you know, pops open without any effort, comes shut without any effort. And it's doing all that without any kind of vertical or horizontal blade play, which brings me to my final bit of good, which is that this one is actually a very nice example. Given this was hand-selected by the previous owner at a store, but it is very nice to see these well-tuned pieces still coming out of Benchmade. This has an action that is just what you would want out of an axis lock knife. It is relatively free swinging and will continue to swing more freely as it gets more life and use into it. This is a great example of this knife, and so this is a very nicely quality controlled piece here, which is good. And then that brings us to the other good stuff, which is that the action is really nice and very flickable, beautifully balanced in that way, and the ergonomics are very good for doing so, and just in the hand overall, it's got some nice subtle sources of texturing. It's fully ambidextrous. The axis lock, this guy is a relatively simple knife, easy to maintain, that's done pretty well, and it has a very nice blade on it for actually cutting things. Let's talk about what's great here. To me, at least, what's great about this knife is actually that wooden aesthetic here. This is using a material called diamond wood, or when Spyderco's using it, it's called Packer wood. It's basically a sort of plywood that's got some resin throughout it to stabilize it. And as a result, you get something that has a very clear wood grain to it, and really adds something a little bit different. Not only is it a nice break from the sort of high-speed, low-drag plastic aesthetic or carbon fiber that so much of the modern knife world has embraced, but for some reason, I've noticed that wood has on a pocket knife has a tendency to make people a little bit, especially people who would normally be scared of a pocket knife, it makes them a little bit more at ease. It reminds them maybe of some outdoorsing tool or something their grandfather carried. I don't know what that's about, but either way, it's something that's kind of nice. This guy, although it's still very much a capable tool, looks a little bit more like a camping tool to them than a high-speed, low-drag tactical murder weapon sort of affair like your ZT up here. And so I like the fact that they're using the diamond wood at all. It gives a little bit of modernity mixed with a little bit of traditionality, and, it's going to be nice in some ways for the lunchroom, even if you're dealing with people who are a little bit frightened of the universe in general. So the diamond wood aesthetic is very nice, and I love seeing that here applied to a very basic everyday carry sort of folder. So there we go. Let's talk about what's not so great, the bad. So on the bad side, first off, one disadvantage of using the wooden material on here is that you get some inconsistency. This is just a simple fact of life. When you move away from an artificial material like a carbon fiber or a G10, where you always have the same thing, wood does not always do that. And so different pieces of wood, even as they're a part of this kind of artificial plywood resin thing, are going to have different looks. And so, for instance, all three of these knives are using the same material, but unfortunately, this one is a particularly unattractive piece. You can see here that although you can see a little bit of grain structure in there, and in fact it's much more attractive on the other side, this just comes off looking dark and oily, whereas the other ones look a lot more woody. And so as a result, the particular knife you get may have a more or less attractive chunk. And so that is something you gotta kind of keep in mind. And if you are really wanting a lighter chunk, that's a reason to go to a retailer and pick out one that's attractive to you. There's another reason for that later, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so the inconsistency is a little problematic, but that's a simple fact of life with the material. Next thing, this has a relatively non-committal recurve. What I mean by that is that there are knives that have serious recurves and that really play it up, that enjoy that recurve and have a little fun with it. This guy just barely has a recurve. I mean, you can tell it does have a recurve, 100%, but there's just not that much to it. And so, at some level, those always drive me a little crazy because they make the knife harder to sharpen, but you're not getting all that much in return for it. So, a little weird. Next thing, the clip on this guy. This is more of a nitpick than anything. Actually, a lot of these things have been. Anytime you have a black clip, a black-coated clip, it will show wear much more readily than anything else. But the thing is, here I have relatively little issue with it because I think it looks very good with this diamond wood. I think if they'd done a silver clip, it starts to look a little weird, although it can be striking in its own way. And so I'm not so problematic with it, but do keep that in mind. This is going to show wear a lot more readily than a silver clip would otherwise. Next thing, this is a relatively small knife, but it is not ground all that aggressively. What I mean by that is that they could have made this a much thinner grind, which would make it much thinner behind the edge, which would have made this a much slicier knife. As it is, it's fine, it cuts things, but I mean, if we look at the back of the sharpening choil here, if we focus in there, yeah, you can see it's a little bit thick behind the edge still. And so on these smaller sorts of knives, I would prefer to see them ground a little more aggressively so they've got a little bit more thinness behind the edge so they cut a little bit better. This isn't the end of any worlds, but it's still something that bugs me. Next thing, one thing you'll notice on this wood is that there are very strong and aggressive milling marks. You can kind of see these horizontal lines all going in this direction on the handle, or at least I sure hope you can. And what this means is that from many angles, that's what you see more strongly than the wood grain, especially in a piece like this with relatively little contrast. That is, I don't know, it's not something that brings me joy because it makes it look a little more artificial, a little less woody than I think it otherwise needs to. It may be adding a little bit of traction, and indeed this finish on this knife has a little bit more traction on the thumb than this finish on the Spyderco Delica in Packer wood here. So that may be their goal here, is that they've added that just so it sticks in the hand a little better, but it doesn't particularly thrill me. Next thing, unfortunately, the lanyard hole is not thrilling me here at all. I can understand that they wanted that the wood would have been too thin back here, and so they just dropped it out of there. But this, to me, is kind of your textbook lazy lanyard hole. Like, crap, we need a lanyard hole. What are we going to do? We'll just cut a chunk out of the wood and then drill an oval. Hey, okay, case closed. The mill and oval, whatever they did with it. Either way, as a result, you end up with this little area in the back here where you just have liner rather than wooden liner, which is a little less ergonomic, and it's kind of unattractive. Everything, it just drives me a little bit crazy. And the worst part about it is that if you just loop your lanyard around this back post here, there is absolutely plenty of clearance before it hits the blade. So that drives me a bit nuts. Then finally, on the bad side, this guy is going to be a pain in the neck to sharpen for a confluence of reasons. S30V is a great steel, but it's not, even among the super steels, it is not my favorite to sharpen. It requires a little bit more of a professional touch, if you will. You can do it at home, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit of a pain. But on top of that, they have this recurve here, which means that a lot of systems that depend on having a flat area, so for instance, flat stone-based systems or guided systems, are not going to have a good time with it, because you can't get that flat stone into this little groove here. And then, on top of that, you have these tall thumb studs, which are going to make it hard to get at this area, and the handle kind of goes back over a little bit here. I look at this knife and I just feel pain in sharpening it. I'm sure I could do it, but I'm really sure I wouldn't want to. And so as a result, I think most people are going to want to use Benchmade's sharpening service to do this. And that is a service that they offer. You can always send a Benchmade knife back to them and they will put a fresh edge on it. And honestly, the edge came out of this pretty good. So I think that'd be okay. Came out of the factory pretty good, that is. But still, that's a little bit annoying. That confluence of tall studs, recurve, handle overlapping, and S30V mean that this is absolutely not a knife that you're probably going to be wanting to sharpen at home. So, to me at least, that's all the bad here, is that it's going to be a little hard to sharpen. The lanyard post in the back here, lanyard hole is pretty ugly, and when the post would have worked fine, drives me a bit crazy. The milling marks on the handle make this look a little bit less woody than it could have otherwise been. It's not round all that aggressively, so it's a little thick behind the edge, not God's gift to slicing. Black clip's going to show wear. It's got a non-committal recurve, and then the inconsistency in this diamond wood material means that you can get things anywhere from absolutely gorgeous to a little bit blah. All out of the exact same model and package. Let's talk about what's ugly here. So on the ugly side is not this particular knife, but Benchmade in general, unfortunately, has lately been doing a really poor job with quality control. This is 2017, October, when I'm saying this right now. But unfortunately, they've been letting a lot of stuff leave the factory that shouldn't have. Knives with horizontal blade play, where the blade shakes back and forth. A vertical blade play, where it shakes back and forth on this dimension. Knives with a poor action that don't swing open and shut easily. Or knives with poor centering, where the blade is off to one side or another when the knife is closed. All of those things are deeply ugly and shouldn't be leaving the factory. You should be able to get a knife that's centered with no play and a very smooth action like this guy is. But the way that you have to ensure that these days is to go to a brick and mortar store and to buy the knife there. To go there and check and see, and it's all the better with this guy because then you can get a piece of wood grain that you like too, but to go there and see, you know what, I like this guy a lot, it's got a great wood grain pattern, and you know what, the action is great, no play, no centering issues, etc. And so that's my big advice right now for Benchmade, is that, yeah, give them a try. They make some great products, but you have to do the quality control yourself. If going in person isn't an option, some retailers will help you out, will actually help you select one with no play, good action, good centering, and maybe even an interesting piece of wood, but that's a little harder to do. But nonetheless, you shouldn't accept a bad model. And if you do get one that's bad, make Benchmade fix it, or return it to your retailer and try something else. So that to me is what's ugly, though, is that Benchmade has had this history of bad quality control, and you, as a result, really need to take a more active role buying one of these than a lot of other brands. So let's go into your final conclusion. Like I said, this one was good. It's because it was picked out at a store. Anyways, final conclusion. Look, final conclusion, this is a very nice, basic, solid tool. I mean, that's kind of a silly thing to say, but at another level, it really isn't. This is a good blade that will cut things, 100%. The construction on it is relatively straightforward. It will take enough abuse, 100%, with this construction. It will take a little bit of neglect. It will polish up beautifully afterwards. All you need to do is clean it out a little bit, do some disassembly maintenance. It'll be right back to usual. And it will provide good years of service for anybody who picks one of these guys up. And then then on top of all that, it's got a very nice aesthetic that's absolutely going to appeal to some, and I think some a lot more than the current high-speed, low-drag, black plastic G10 sort of aesthetic they've got going on here. And so I think there is a lot of good here, and I think that this is a very, very good choice for an everyday carry pocket knife. But there are some other good competition to consider. One of the closest pieces of comparison from Benchmade is the Midi Griptilian. I don't have one handy right now, but it does have some, this guy's got some pros relative to the Griptilian. I mean, the handle on this guy feels a lot better. The Griptilian, at least the lower end model, is very much plasticky, whereas this is a resin and actual full metal liners. The steel is going to be better on this than the base model Griptilian, and the wood design does have a certain appeal. But of course, the Griptilian's got some advantages, because this guy's going to be harder to sharpen. This guy's heavier. Recurves aren't going to be ideal for a lot of people, and it's $50 more to buy one of these than the Griptilian. So there are some good reasons to consider that. Another really good alternative is actually the Spyderco Delica I've been flying around here with. This is my personal preference. Between these two, I go Delica every day of the week, because the Delica is a little bit slicier, it's nicer to sharpen. I prefer the opening hole to the thumb stud, and, you know, it just fits my hand and, frankly, my pocket a little bit better. But the problem with this guy is that even though it's the same price, this is a retailer exclusive, and it's a lot harder to find. So there's that. But at the end of the day, look, this knife is kind of a matter of taste. There are going to be a lot of people who aren't picking up what this is putting down. They don't want the recurve. They don't like the wood. They don't like any variety. In that case, there are plenty of other great knives out there. The thing is, if you're looking at this, you're thinking, wow, this is a beautiful thing. If you want a solid everyday carry knife with a good steel, you don't mind sending it back to Benchmade to sharpen it, and you're able to pick one out in person, both for the wood and for the quality control, then I think the North Fork is absolutely not going to fork you over. And that it's going to serve you well for many, many years to come. Solid little choice right here. So, hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. And I'm going to stop this review before it goes north rather than going south. Actually, no, I wanted to go north. All right, that one didn't work. But anyways, have a good one. Bye now.